my own I have my own human resources company for the past 8 years, and my role has been to really support small to medium-sized companies with their HR needs. Most small to medium-sized companies don't have a need for a full-time HR person, which I'm sure that probably is fit for most of you. And I've been providing support throughout the state. I work with some larger companies from time to time, but kind of my sweet spot is small to medium-sized companies. So you all have had some pretty exciting changes with regard to the new law and legislation that has gone into effect that will allow you to pay more, increase pay. And I know you have been talking with folks from the Richards Group about benefits. So I'm going to hit some of the high points. I decided not to do a PowerPoint presentation on purpose because the last few times that we've gotten together, you all have had so many questions, and I want to make sure that I'm zeroing in on what you're interested in hearing and kind of a combination of what I think you need to know. So with that said, I'm just going to start off by telling you a couple of things that have changed. So when you have new employees, one of the documents that you need to be sure to complete, we often refer to as the Form I-9. When we talk about the Form I-9, that's the form that says, I am who I say I am, and I'm authorized and eligible to work in the United States. So that's the document that the employee needs to bring some form of ID with them. Things to keep in mind, the Form I-9 has changed. There is a new form that you must use effective November 1st of this year. So that's really important to update because that form can be audited by Immigration and Control as well as the Department of Labor. So you don't want to have that form in with all of your other personnel documents. Keep it separate. You need to have those forms for every active employee. That is not necessary for the owner of the business, and that's going to depend on how your business is set up and whether you're considered an employee or not. That form is done one time at time of hire. If the person leaves your employment and is rehired within 3 years, there's a rehire section on the form or a rehire page now on the form, or you can have them complete a new form. Now, I'm not going to give you all of the details on I-9s because honestly, we could spend an hour and a half, believe it or not, on I-9s. But what you need to remember is every employee needs to complete it. Please take the time to get trained. There are trainings on the USCIS website, and I will send some links to you as well. There are trainings on there. There are instructions on there. I called this controlling your controllables, right? If there are instructions and timeframes on how to complete something and when it must be completed by, easy peasy, do what it says. Because if you get audited and you're missing a form and that does not align with who is active, an active employee, there are fines and penalties for that. There is no need to be spending any of your hard-earned money in areas that are unnecessary. So again, pay attention to that. And if you have I-9s for employees who have left your company, you need to make sure that you are not keeping them longer than you're supposed to keep them. So of course, there's a formula for that. So you want to keep your current employees in one folder, and you want to keep your employees who have left your company in another folder. And you only want to keep them for a certain period of time, and that is defined, and you will find it in the instructions on that website. And again, I'll make sure that along with this recording that we follow it up with some links. If anyone has any questions specifically on the I-9, just pop it into the chat box. But most of what I think you're going to find helpful and valuable will actually be on the website itself. So that's one document you want to have. Luann?
Teresa, there is a question about, do they need to do new I-9s for existing employees?
Excellent question. I'm glad someone thought to ask that question. The answer is no. Yay. You don't have to worry about new forms. So what I say is that that is a one and done form, meaning you hired me. I have verified that you are eligible for employment, and you are who you say you are, and you have authorization to work in the United States. Once that form is done, we only do it one time. There's no need, nor should you do it again, because that would not be following the instructions. And USCIS and the Department of Labor are pretty particular about us following instructions and not doing more than we're supposed to do and not doing less than we're supposed to do. So along with the I-9, there's going to be the W-4. One of the things that you also may wonder about, since we're talking about employees, and I do get this question a fair amount, is, well, could I just hire this person as an independent contractor? So that may come up. You may have someone who works for another employer who's in the childcare industry, and maybe they're just going to fill in here and there for you. It's not going to be a lot of time. You may consider them on a temporary assignment. What you need to remember, and this is very important as well, again, falls under that heading of controlling your controllables. In order for someone to be an independent contractor, there is the Vermont independent contractor test. There's the IRS independent contractor test. There's the Department of Labor independent contractor test. Unless that person is in business for themselves, they are free to come and go as they please. They make their own schedule. They're essentially under their own umbrella. And they are advertising their business and have multiple clients. And the type of work they do is different than the type of work you're providing. What you are likely going to find is that that is not going to pass the independent contractor test to hire a child care worker as an independent contractor. So for example, I passed the independent contractor test. I'm in business for myself. I have multiple clients. I can come and go as I choose. My clients don't direct my work. My job is my job. I come in, I advise, I recommend. I don't have to, show up at a particular time, although I may arrange that with my client, of course, so that it's mutually beneficial for the timing of this. But you definitely want to be paying attention to that, because I will tell you the IRS and the Department of Labor, particularly on the state level, are paying attention to that. Why? Because they want to make sure that people who are employees get the benefit of, workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, if any of those, would apply in their situation. They also want to make sure that that employers are paying their fair share of employment taxes, right? Social Security and Medicare, along with your state and federal taxes. So that is when you want to make sure you're getting right. And again, all you have to do is Google, and you don't have to look at all three of those independent contractor tests. I'm telling you that there are three, in case you're curious and want to check it out. They are not exactly the same, but there's enough overlap. And I can pretty much guarantee, although this isn't a legal opinion, I can pretty much guarantee if they don't pass one, you're not going to find the other two that they're going to pass. All right, so moving on from that, a few things that I've run into, and you likely already have this set up, so this is just kind of a quick check-in. I've run into situations where employers are paying folks biweekly. So every 2 weeks, someone gets a paycheck. But what they have not made really clear is what the work week is. So a work week is that 7-day-a-week period, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that you base your payroll on. So your work week can be Sunday through Saturday. It can be Monday through Sunday. It can be whatever you choose, but you must choose it and basically stick to it. And the reason that's so important is that's how you determine how much overtime you are required to pay your hourly employees, who are technically referred to as non-exempt under the Fair Labor Standard Act. We call it hourly because it's easier for us, but it's really called non-exempt. And it means that you must pay them time and a half for every hour over 40 in a work week. So sometimes that can be a little bit confusing, because especially for employees, because they're like, no, I get, it's 80 hours if they're working 40 hours each week. So, if I don't work, if I work, if I work, now I'm sorry, I'm getting my tongue all tangled up here. You want to make sure your employees understand that when they do their timesheet, which they should be doing a timesheet, or they should have some kind of timekeeping system. However you decide to maintain those records is up to you. But again, you want to make sure that you have a really good, solid timekeeping system, because that touches their pay. I like to say anything that touches an employee's pay, I want them directing it. I want them writing down, here are my hours, and at the end of the week, here's my total. I'm signing off on this saying that I filled it out accurately and I told the truth, or something to that effect. That way, we have an employee who's verifying, yes, this is what happened, and then you are reviewing their timesheet and signing off on it. Now, they can do timesheet for week 1 if you pay bi-weekly, and then a timesheet for week 2, and they hand it in at the end of the pay period so that you can do payroll. They don't have to hand one in each week unless that's your process. You want to make sure you have a really good handle on that. Another thing that I get asked is, well, my employee, they just never hand in their time card on time. So you know what? I'm not going to pay them. That will get you into difficulty. That would be called withholding wages. So we want to make sure that we are holding our employees accountable for turning their timesheet in on time, but we cannot withhold their wages. And if you can't get a hold of them, then you're going to need to estimate what you believe their hours would have been if they had filled out their timesheet. You can adjust it after a discussion with them. If you overpaid them, then you can adjust it, and you just want to make sure that you were documenting that. I'm just going to take a pause for a moment, make sure there aren't any questions around payroll. I don't want to go too deeply into this, but if there is anything else related to payroll that would be helpful for me to chime in on, I'm happy to do that.
I don't see any questions in the chat right now, so I think we can keep going, and then we'll just keep circling back.
That sounds great. Thank you. So that record keeping piece is really important. You also may offer direct deposit. If you're not offering it currently, you may want to offer it in the future. In the state of Vermont, you cannot require an employee to receive direct deposit. You can strongly encourage it, and a lot of employees are very happy to have direct deposit. What you want to make sure you do, though, is have the employee fill out a form. And you can usually get that from your payroll system. You could look online, but I would encourage you, if you are using something like QuickBooks or Gusto or any of those payroll systems, they typically will have something, and you want to have your employee fill that out. And very often on there, it will say you need to provide a copy of a voided check, which a lot of folks don't even write checks anymore. So you will want to have them receive some kind of statement from their bank. That does not mean their bank statement, because you don't want to be seeing all of the personal things coming in and out of their bank statement. But if they go to their bank and say, listen, I want direct deposit, can you give me, a printout of the information I need to provide to my employer so that I can get direct deposit? The bank will know exactly what they're looking for. The reason I like to strongly encourage, and honestly, I would not accept a direct deposit form unless it included one or the other of those items, because I want to have that verification that they wrote down the correct information regarding their routing number and their account number on that form, because it does happen where that their paycheck can get deposited someplace else. And then it's kind of a mess to untangle. So again, control the controllables and make sure that you require and follow through with them completing all of that information and providing it to you. The one thing, across the board that I would say is, if you're going to require something of someone, make sure they have information in advance. You may have a nice little welcome letter that you zip off saying, hey, here's what the information you'll want to know about your I-9. Here's a link to the list of acceptable documents you can bring. By the way, here's a link to how to complete the W-4, which is probably pretty familiar now, but in 2020, a new form W-4 came out, and it's very different than what most of us have been accustomed to completing all these years. So I provide a link that shows them how to figure that out. I also make sure that with the direct deposit, they have that information in advance. And I just kindly let them know, if you show up and you don't have this information, you won't be able to start today. Now, that is really hard to say and to follow through with, right? Because you have children to take care of and you have staffing ratios that you need to adhere to. I get it. You will be chasing people and spending so much time trying to track them down to give you the documents that they need to give you. With the Form I-9, that was non-negotiable for me. I tried to do that in terms of, oh, you forgot your whatever document that they're going to bring, because we can't tell them what to bring. They have to figure it out. Here's the list. If they don't bring it, I can't complete my side of the I-9 within 3 business days. And then I'm chasing. And what if that employment situation doesn't work out and they leave? Now you have an incomplete I-9. So do it on the front end, make sure folks know what to expect. I always recommend too that you think about doing your onboarding prior to the day the person is going to start. It is just so much easier. If someone has forgotten a document, they have the opportunity maybe to go home or reschedule your HR orientation, but they can still start on the day you need them to start, so it doesn't cause an issue with your staffing ratios. And it gives you a little bit of breathing space and gives them some breathing space too. But the better your communication up front, the better result you're going to get before that person begins their job. And I also look at it like every bit of behavior is communication. So if I have someone that maybe I liked how they interviewed, but there were a couple of things I was kind of curious about, or maybe I noticed I don't know that we necessarily need to call them red flags, but something that just caught your attention, but you're like, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to be aware of it, but I'm not going to worry. And then you notice another thing and another thing. Though that bit of information is important for us to think about. Because if you have a pattern of behavior of someone not following through, you may want to have a conversation with them sooner versus later. And it doesn't have to be an ugly conversation. It can be, hey, can I check in with you for a moment? Here are the things that I've noticed. Talk to me. What's going on for you? It gives you a great opportunity to get some insight into that, that person, and maybe they have something going on. Maybe it's something they didn't realize was as important as you're intending for it to be, because maybe other employers weren't as serious about it as you are. So just make sure that you take those steps in advance. I do know that, as I mentioned before, you've been talking with folks from the Richards Group, I believe, who have been doing some presentations. I've worked with the Richards Group as well. They're amazing. They're great people, a lot of really great information. The one thing that I would ask you to keep in mind that sometimes will come up, and sometimes won't come up. The Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, will likely be a requirement. This comes from the Department of Labor. In essence, what ERISA is all about is making sure that benefits are administered in a way that they are fair, so that highly compensated individuals, for example, that some folks in your business don't benefit more than others. So it's really important. It's a document that needs to be written. If you are providing what are called welfare benefits, and Department of Labor defines welfare benefits, that's going to be like your health insurance, your dental insurance, your vision insurance. Now, I cannot go into depth about ERISA because that is not my area of expertise. I know about it. I also know that it's really important for you to know whether you need such a document or not. My guess, educated guess, based on what I've been doing for the past many years in human resources and administering benefits when I worked for companies, it's likely you are going to need such a document. And that document typically it must be available to your employees to read. And sometimes there's like a summary plan description that you must hand out to your employees. So these are, again, here's another control your controllable. Sometimes benefits specialists will mention that, but that is also not their area of expertise. So sometimes they won't mention it to you. So if there's one big takeaway from this, if you are going to be offering any welfare benefits to your staff, please be sure and ask about ERISA. And if your benefits specialist says, no, you don't have to worry about that, you need to know why you don't. And I would explore it further. Make sure that if someone says, no, this doesn't apply to you, they show you where that information lives and they can back up why they're telling you this doesn't apply. So there are going to be some circumstances that it may not, but that's definitely one you want to get right. Let's see. That's what we want to talk about. Benefits.
Teresa, there's a couple questions about hourly of paying people that you have covered that I want to catch you now before you move on. There's one question is, if you pay people if they work 40 hours and then you pay them to attend trainings, which puts them over the 40 hours, would that be overtime? And then the other one, and I'll say it right now because I think they sort of relate in some way. The other one is, if you have people who work, do we need to pay overtime for partial hours, say 30 minutes? So if someone stays a half hour overtime, do they need to be paid overtime? So that full-time and then overtime question comes up a lot.
Great questions. The answer to the training question is, if it's a required training and you're going to want to look at the Fair Labor Standard Act to make sure you get this part right, because there are rules around training. And if it's something that you're saying you really need to go, or this is being offered and there's an impression that this is a required training, and underneath that are 3 or 4 different items that will describe to you when it is considered a training that must be paid. Their time to attend the training must be paid. There are few instances that I've encountered where the training didn't have to be paid. So you should be thinking about, this is likely a training that I'm going to have to pay my employees for their time to attend. So again, there is guidance under the Fair Labor Standard Act for that. I can make sure that I send the link to that as well. Any hours over 40, and I understand now why, we're focusing on hours instead of maybe minutes, but any time worked over 40 hours would be overtime compensable. So you'd have to pay them time and a half. So typically, it's probably going to be in quarter-hour increments, right? Because it's typically going to round up. So if they work 40 and a quarter hours, then there's 15 minutes of overtime that must be paid. Did I get that all there, Luann?
I think so. And if that wasn't exactly where you were going, the person who asked it can follow up in chat, but I think you covered it.
Okay,
thank you.
Great. So speaking of hourly, and I'll touch on this pretty briefly because I think you likely already have this figured out and down, checked off your list. Under the Fair Labor Standard Act, there is both hourly and salary. So hourly, if you read under the act means exempt, non-exempt. And that means they must be paid at least minimum wage, and they are paid overtime, time and a half for any hours worked over 40 in that work week. There is also the salaried, which under the act is exempt. What that means is they are exempt from the minimum wage requirement, and they are exempt from receiving overtime for any hours worked over 40 hours. Sometimes folks, especially employees, will say, hey, you know what? Just pay me X amount every single week and I'll be happy. Don't pay me any overtime. Just set my position up as a salaried position. And the employer will think, well, that sounds like it's a reasonable thing to do. The employee's asking me to do this. So, okay. What you want to make sure of, though, is that the position, not the person, the position they are hired to do actually meets two tests: the salaries test and the duties test. So the salaries test means they must earn at least $684 a week. And by the way, the DOL has a proposal in right now that they are working on to raise that $684 pretty significantly. So that's going to change. And under the duties test, there are certain duties requirements that position must perform. If you look at the salaries test and the position passes the salaries test because you're paying $684 or more, yay. If you look at the duties test and they do not pass from a job description perspective, the type of work that they are doing should be higher level types of work. So an example that was given to me was if you have a person who is doing accounts payable, accounts receivable for your company, that's not going to be an exempt position because their duties are being directed by others. Their duties are, they are not in the course of doing their work. They're not allowed to make decisions, for example, contract decisions, vendor decisions, decisions that bind the company to agreements with other entities. They're not the type of work that they do also typically isn't the supervision of others. So when we think about folks who come in, and let's just call it at more of the operational level of your business, and they are hands-on caring for, the children in your childcare business, those are likely going to be hourly positions. And I think you'd be hard pressed to get the work that individual does to pass the duties test. So the bottom line is that exempt positions, salaried positions, must pass both the duties test and the salaries test. If it fails one, if it passes the duties test and you're not paying them at least $684 a week, then it is not an exempt, it is not a salaried position. So it must pass both. So that's one that trips people up. The other one that that came up for me just a few weeks ago. We had a question about a biweekly payroll. So again, every 2 weeks, and they get paid every 2 weeks. And employees were wanting, so the question came up, can my employee, if they work 45 hours in week one, can they just work 5 hours less in week 2? Because they'd like that kind of flexible working arrangement. No, they cannot. And the reason they can't is that employees are not able to give up any of their rights under the law. So the law says employers must pay time and a half for any hours worked over 40 in a work week. Even though your employee says, hey, this would be really cool, I'd like to really be able to do this. And you're like, hey, this could really work on our side too. We're both in agreement. The Department of Labor would not allow that. And there would be probably, I'm quite sure if you were audited, there would be back pay for allowing that kind of flexibility and not paying the overtime that employee was required to receive. So you just want to make sure that before you decide that you're going to do something or someone's proposing something outside of the realm of, wage an hour, it sounds different to you, but it could be a really cool option. Just check with someone who is really good or a really good resource for wage and hour law. There also is a really good booklet that covers some of the things that you might find helpful if you haven't seen it before. It's a summary of wage and hour law from the state of Vermont, keeping in mind that there's also federal wage and hour laws as well. So, and the Vermont summary booklet will say in there, check out the Fair Labor Standard Act, or it will say we defer to the Fair Labor Standard Act. So those are, I think, the high points with regard to the payroll and bringing someone on board, and those important documents that you need to make sure that you're keeping on record. I am sure that I believe it Jesse from the Richards Group who talked about all of your benefits, and Jesse would have talked to you about the form, the Declaration of Healthcare form, that if you are going to be offering health insurance, you need to make sure your employees, every one of your employees, fill out one of those forms. What I will, again, key you in on, keep those forms separate. You need to have one for every employee. And you need to make sure that you are keeping them for 3 years. Once the 3 years ends, you want to put them in that fancy shredder that like cross cuts them so that whatever is shredded in a particular way. So we are sure that confidentiality is maintained. And those shredders are not terribly expensive, but you likely would be of need of that for any of your childcare records that you need to dispose of from time to time.
Teresa, would you like a couple salary versus hourly questions right now, or do you want me to wait until
no, right now is great.
Okay. One person is an LLC, and I'm going to say this only because I just did the the legal training where they talked about maybe LLC S Corp. She pays herself as an employee. She pays herself as a salaried employee, but she does not make the salary, enough to fit the salary criteria. And is that okay because she is the LLC member? And I don't know if you can even answer that one. That might be very specific.
That is, I don't know the answer to that one, but it's a really great question and definitely something worth diving into. An accountant may know the answer to that. Where I would tend to go, I would ask, I know we have resources through the Vermont Small Business Development Center. I would ask someone from Vermont Law School. I think you're going to want a legal opinion on that because accountants are going to be focusing in, kind of the accounting world, and may not necessarily focus on the employee side of things, the human resources side of things.
And Jean from the law school is the one who did the legal session with some law students, and they are available for questions, and we can follow up with their contact information. The other one is they have an employee who passes the duties test, but she is a part-time employee. So can she be salaried?
If she's making $684 as a part-time employee,
Same money. Okay.
it is. She's not going to pass the salaries test. Yeah.
Okay. I do want to mention at this point that with the changes in income coming into programs starting next year, maybe more and more people will hit the salary criteria. So that will be interesting to see as programs are putting the incoming money into teacher salary. So it'll be interesting to see if there are changes. I think that's it right now.
And just keep in mind that with that salary piece, that is going to change. So my clients right now, and I would imagine many businesses right now, are doing an analysis where they may have employees who are going to earn below that higher threshold for the salary test. So they're doing an analysis right now about, do we raise their pay so that they will be able to keep that position classified as exempt or salaried, or do we turn this position into an hourly position? The one thing that typically is more difficult than anything else is when you take a person who has been in a salaried position and move them to hourly, even though this isn't the intent, it feels like a demotion. And the idea, again, with that exempt position, with that salaried position, is it is focused on the work done, not the number of hours it takes to do the job. That said, it doesn't mean that if your hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you can't require them to, work that schedule. It just means that there's some flexibility there, right? That if they have a doctor's appointment, you're not likely going to tell them that, hey, you have to use your vacation bank or your PTO bank or your sick time bank, because, that's the flexibility that comes with that classification of that position. There's sometimes some confusion around that. The other thing that interestingly came up recently, and this is tied to the independent contractor, and hopefully I'll be able to describe this well. I got a question about giving a person giving them, I believe it's a W-9. I might be saying that wrong. In other words, the person was only going to work for them sporadically in just a few hours. And the impression that this owner had was because it was under $600, 1099, I'm saying that wrong, that they could just issue this individual a 1099 because they had earned under $600, and they only worked for them once or twice a year. If you actually look that up, the IRS says 1099s are for independent contractors. So even though you may hire someone for a couple of hours once or twice a year, they are still your employee. So think of it this way. If you have hired someone and you bring them on as an employee, and for whatever reason, they don't make it through their first day, they didn't suddenly doesn't turn it into a situation where you could suddenly send them a 1099. An employee is an employee. So how much they earn and how often they work for you does not change them from an employee into, oh, it's less than this amount, so I don't have to run them through payroll. that will get you into difficulty. So that was a new one for me. But that $600 threshold has been around for a long time. And I think, I don't know if something has changed around that or if it's just been something that people are misunderstanding. The other thing that I'm going to, I had a couple of links up here. Excuse me one second. There we go. A couple of things that I would encourage you to take a look at. I have followed Ramsey Solutions for a number of years now, and they have a lot of really great information for employers. They have an Entree Leadership series. There's a book called Entree Leadership, and it really does a great job talking to those who are in small businesses about how to run your businesses, things to be thinking about. They actually did a study they did a 2022 Smart Dollar employee benefits study. Since you're going to be thinking about benefits that you might be providing to your employees in the next year, I think this could be really helpful for you to take a look at. One of the things that we do know that is very stressful for employees is really not knowing how to manage their money. So one of the things that you might think about would be a financial budgeting program. And actually, Ramsey Solutions does have that for employers that teaches employees how to manage their money, how to budget, how to pay off debt. The reason that I was thinking about that in the context of talking with you this evening is that very often when we get a raise, what do? We just spend more. And your employees are already, not making lots and lots of money. You're paying them, what you're able to afford, which is great, but not as much as you'd like to be able to pay them, obviously. If you are going to give them a raise, as you're looking to do that, maybe think about arming them with additional information so that they aren't just continuing to spend at that higher level and not really making any traction. So that one is a big one, and it is a big stressor for employees, regardless of what industry sector we're in. So, and it is very natural. Oh, I've got more money. And yes, I've got all of these payments over here. I can afford my payments until something happens. And then it's a crisis. And then they haven't, they don't have an emergency fund set aside. They have lots of payments that now they can't make because they didn't plan for it, or, for some reason they're out of work. So it could happen that those of you who may be expanding your business, you get to a size where if you're 15 or more employees who work on average of 30 hours a week, you are now obligated to offer family medical leave. That's an unpaid leave of absence. It will protect their job, but it's not a source of income. Or if you're smaller than that and something happens, maybe they have an accident, injury, or illness at home, and they can't work and they don't have an emergency fund, and yet they still have all these bills to pay, we haven't really helped them by not, giving them other ideas and other ways of managing their money. So I'd strongly encourage you to look into that. And maybe that's something, that groups of you could get together, and maybe that could be a benefit to offer your employees. So the study summary is very interesting. And the other benefit that I would encourage you to look into, kind of sounds like my area's benefits right now, but I know about them. I don't advise on them. And thinking about retirement for your employees. There's an investment calculator on the Ramsey Solution website. And I did this with my students in the resort management class, because they need to understand how people they may supervise, or if they're a manager, they need to understand the mechanics of paychecks and benefits and that sort of thing. And so I had them pull up the investment calculator and enter their age, their current age, around 21, and then the age they plan to retire, and just pop in $100 a month. And then on average, what they thought the rate of return would be. Any guess from, say, 25 to 67, how much money potentially you could end up with in your retirement? Just shout it right out, or even put it in the chat. I'm going to I'll put it in here. And I don't know, I guess I can share my screen. So I'll show this to you. Can you all see my screen here? So if you started investing at age 25 and you were going to retire at age 67 and you don't have any investments right now, I put in 0. And if every month you put $100, and on average, the average rate of return historically over the 30 years of the S&P 500, the rate of return has been roughly 10 to 12%. I did 10%, $774,000 at $100 a month. It's pretty eye-opening. And then if you had them do this exercise as part of offering them retirement, if they start at 35 and retire at 67, doing the $100 a month, 10%, $278,000, a remarkable difference. So encouraging your employees, educating your employees, thinking about offering a retirement, even if you can't offer a retirement, educating your employees and having a financial advisor come in, and they could start their own retirement fund. Now, we don't do a great job educating our employees about the power of compound interest. And I will tell you, my students were just blown away by the difference. And every single one of them said, I could find $100 a month. I probably just, do something with that money that's just really not valuable at all. So anything that we can do to help people, open their eyes and see into the future and see their future instead of staying stuck in the moment. So, one opportunity may be with the increase in pay that you may be able to offer them. Maybe they took $100 a month aside because now they've seen that it is possible to retire and have a good retirement fund that supports them outside of Social Security, if we even have it, when some of our younger folks come up through. So, all right. We're doing pretty good on time. Are there other questions, Luann, in the chat box before I jump forward?
I don't see new questions added. I would love to pause right now and have everyone think about what you just shared. The idea of an opportunity for investing in employees' retirement, their own retirement, is something that the early education workforce has not considered by and large. And I think it's so important. And I got a bit distracted over here. So I wasn't sure if you talked about the option of, if you are going to offer something like this, having folks have to opt out as opposed to opt in. Did you mention that piece?
I did. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, Luann and I were talking about this the other day, and we were getting so excited about all of the.
Well, just because sometimes when people are young and they stop at Starbucks every day on the way in, and so they are spending that $100 a month on, something that's maybe could be put someplace else, they're not going to think about retirement. But if it's there and it's a part of what everyone is doing and you have to opt out, I think sometimes that's helpful. And I happen to have worked in a program that actually was able to do this a number of years ago, and employees have saved, including myself, I will tell you, who started at a very older, an older age. It's a great savings. It's a great way to approach this. So yeah, I think that's something to mention.
Yeah, definitely. I always encourage my clients to do the opt-out, meaning when you come to work for us, you are automatically going to be part of our retirement plan. And if you don't want to do that, then you have to sign a paper and you have to say, I do not want to participate in the, and there's a form for that. And your financial advisor can help you set up your retirement plan. And there are lots of different options available that they can discuss with you. There are certainly different plans available for LLCs versus, other types of, corporations and that sort of thing. But having them opt out, I think, is really important. Also, you may decide to provide an employer match. So you may say, we're going to match up to 1 or 2% or 3% or 5%. So there are a lot of different ways to design your plan. And again, it's going to go back to, what you can afford. But if you can provide that employee or the employer match, rather, that means that there's free money they're leaving on the table. If they put in $100 and you're matching 1% of their contribution, that's money that that they're getting on top of what their contribution is. So those sorts of things I think are really important. And the more we can educate our employees, the more they will be able to see for the future instead of staying stuck in the moment. And the more I read about financial literacy and just being in control of your finances, the peace that comes along with that for your employees means they're not stressing out about things that come up in the course of our lives. It may be worrisome and troublesome, but if they have the finances, behind them because they know how to run a budget, they're living within their means, they're using that increased, pay that they're able to get more wisely, and they feel like they're in control of their finances, then they can see hope for the future. And I think that's a real big takeaway that I think, we probably all could do a better job with as employers. The job descriptions, that is something that I would encourage you to think about. I always look at the job description. That's the tool that helps you describe to your employee what the expectations are. Now, obviously, these are going to be, kind of high level essential job functions. I like to have employees sign off on them. I like to make sure that there's a statement on there that also says, hey, it's a job description. It's not a contract. And again, there's usually some language or verbiage that goes along with that. And that might be something that the Vermont Law School, could help with in terms of crafting a job description. They may also have a different opinion than I do about having a sign off on a job description. Different attorneys have different ideas about things. Doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong. It's just a different approach. The attorneys that I have worked with like having a signature on the job description because that means the person actually should have read it. They're invested in it, but also to make sure that it doesn't look like a contract, you want to have that at-will language in there as well. I did touch on the family leave and mentioned if you have 15 or more employees who work an average of 30 or more hours a week, you are obligated to offer 12 weeks, up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. So that will be important for you to be aware of. If you have 10 employees who work on an average of 30 hours or more a week, you are required to offer parental leave. So again, it's not helpful right now to go into a deep dive of all of that and the eligibility and so on and so forth. I mention that to you because I want to plant a seed so that if you are at those levels, then you can go back and take a look and find out more. And if you're going to increase the size of your company, that you are considering that as part of what you're doing. Sometimes folks will get a little bit tangled up if they offer a short-term disability benefit and let's pretend for a moment it's your employee. They're eligible for the family leave because they have their own serious medical condition. They'll sometimes folks will think, well, I'm offering short-term disability. We don't need to do this family leave thing. Yes, you do. They are two completely different items that overlap. So your family leave is all about job protection. Your short-term disability, that is about wage replacement. So always be, aware that there are different purposes for things that may happen at the same time, such as those two benefits. And why do you want someone to start that clock ticking on the family leave? Because that 12 weeks is a benefit for them. So you want to make sure people are taking advantage of that benefit. If they don't, you're still obligated to offer it. And if they have another serious medical condition of a family member, or it could be their own serious medical condition, then they get another 12 weeks, even if you gave them 12 weeks and didn't start that clock ticking. So now they have 26 weeks. So you cannot do these leaves of absence retroactively. When you find out about it, and you find out that, Teresa is going to be out with surgery for her knee, you want to make sure that you're talking with me right away about family leave, and that we get the paperwork in place so that we have job protection in place. And if you offer that short-term disability benefit, that we get the paperwork in there for that as well. And by the way, how icky is it to talk to Teresa about, hey, we've got this paperwork to fill out, so that you get job protection, so that you have a job to come back to. That's a bit awkward to talk about. And sometimes I think employers are hesitant to have that conversation because it may give the impression that you were going to get rid of me, which is not the case at all. So the way I approach it is, we have this benefit that we are providing. We're obligated to provide it, and we're happy to provide it. And what happens with this benefit through the state of Vermont doesn't administer it, but it is a state law. It says that while you're out with your surgery, recovering from your knee, you have 12 weeks of that leave. And then we want you back at work. Now, obviously, there can be some extending circumstances to that, but that's the gist of what the law is. There also is short-term leave of up to 24 hours in whatever, tracking period that you have. And there are typically, I find that employers don't track this 24 hours because employees are typically saying, hey, I'm just going to use my PTO to take my child to that doctor's appointment. So that 24 hours of leave is also unpaid, but most employees don't ask for it. They typically will say, hey, I want to use my PTO, or I want to use my vacation time for this. But that is something, and your labor law posters, which I'm going to be nodding my head. Yes, we all have labor law posters. We do. You want to make sure you have the appropriate, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Yay. You want to make sure that your employees know that you have labor law posters. Yes. If they don't know, and you get a walkthrough by the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor says, hey, what about those labor law posters? You don't want Teresa going, what? I don't even know we have them. You want to make sure all of your employees know where they are. You want them located in a place where employees are going to be, if you have a break room or something like that, wherever they typically would be, you want to have your labor law posters there. And please make sure they're filled out. There's a sexual harassment section that needs to be filled out. There's a workers' comp, and I believe there's a liability insurance section. You want to make sure that those are filled out. If they're not, then I hate to be saying this again, but fines and penalties for that, folks, if we don't fill it out correctly. And if a law changes in the middle of the year, and it is required to post about that new law, unless your payroll provider sends you your labor law posters, you are not likely going to know about it unless someone tells you about it. So, for example, this year, July 1st, there was a change to the laws around the definition of severe and pervasive behavior under harassment. So it became a much more an easier way for employees to say, hey, I'm really upset and bothered by the way, someone is behaving or some of the things that they're saying. So the standard is, a better way to say that is, the standard is much more generous than the law previously had in place. So that means labor law posters needed to change July 1st, excuse me. So if you don't get your labor law posters through your payroll provider, then what you might want to do is look at a source like J.J. Keller. They have what's called an update subscription, which means when the law changes, they're going to send you brand new fancy posters. And just, again, make sure your employees know where those are located. So it's about 10 after. I'm going to stop talking for a moment and see if there are any other questions, any areas that I haven't talked about, maybe that people would like me to talk about.
Teresa, first of all, I wondered if you want to take your screen down so we can see everybody's faces.
Thank you.
I was trying to figure out if I could do that for you, and I could not.
I know, I get chatting away and I forget that my screen is still up there. Thank you.
And then there is another question about the salaried versus hourly, which is, do you need to have timesheets and record keeping for salaried employees like you do for hourly ones?
That's a really great question. No, you don't, as I understand it. However, many times, so for example, when I worked at Rutland Mental Health, I needed to complete a timesheet. And the reason that I did is because we, there could be grant funding, for example. And so you have to account for hours under the grant. There could be times where you're doing, and this may not come up very often in your industry sector, but there may be instances where you're providing a direct service or a billable service. And so you need to know that this is a direct service. So for example, it may be important to know when your salaried employees are actually working hands-on with children because they have to fill in for someone who was not working that day. You may use that information for budgeting purposes. When I worked at Rutland Mental Health, there were times that I had to step out of my role and work directly with clients. So we had to account for the time for each client's budgeted hours. So they needed to capture that. And then there was time that a lot of my time went into indirect time on the budget line item. And so we needed to account for that. You may want to capture time for professional development, for example. So if I were you, I would look at what are my needs. I don't think you want to be overly prescriptive and to be starting to treat your salaried employees like hourly employees. What I think, the focus here is, what information do I need that would be useful for me in running my business? And if having salaried employees break down their time into certain categories that align with your budget, so that when you do your planning from year to year from a budgeting perspective, you can extract the information you need and do a better job, planning for the next year. Now you have the information that you need. Speaking of that, I typically bring this up as well, so I don't want to forget to say this. We hire awesome people more often than not. Sometimes we hire people, it's just not the fit they were hoping and we were hoping, but overall, we hire amazing people. And one of the things that's great about hiring amazing people and working with amazing people is that they're really hard workers and they go above and beyond. And that is awesome until we bump into the wage and hour law. Because if you've hired an amazing person who shows up 15 minutes early or 30 minutes early, and they start setting everything up for the morning and not clocking in, that's going to be a problem for you. And guess what? Sometimes you're not going to know because they don't tell you. Why? They don't want you to worry. Because you know what? I love getting there at 6:30 in the morning because I'm the only one here and I'm unlocking and I have my coffee and I'm setting up breakfast for the children and I'm getting, the day started. And then other people come in and, I'm supposed to be here at 7. And so I clock in at 7. That is not a good idea at all, because that person is supposed to be paid from the time they start working for you. When they're an hourly employee, they're supposed to be paid for their time because they're an hourly employee. That is another thing they don't get to give up. They can't work for you for free. So make sure when you onboard your employees, you're very clear. I learned that. I actually learned it by accident with one of my the employers that I worked for, because I started talking about, tell me about your day. What do you do? How does this happen? And they're like, yeah, I come 15 minutes early. I'm like, awesome. You put that on your timesheet? Oh no, it's just something I do. And I'm like, fabulous. And I stay 15 minutes late too. So I clock out and I sweep up and I do this and I do that. And I'm like, fantastic. How long have you been doing that? Years. Yahoo. Once we found out about that, of course, you get curious. Who else is doing this? And it turns out that there were 3 employees who were working off the clock. No one knew. They weren't trying to cause any problem. They were trying to do a really good job. And they knew budgets were tight. And so they were trying to help out. So, we sat down and we determined, what we were going to do. If the Department of Labor came in and had done an audit, my understanding is they'll go back 2 years for a serious offense. They'll go back 3 years for a willful offense. So the difference between the two is if a serious is, this shouldn't have happened. You didn't know, you did what, let's get this tidied up and taken care of. Willful means you knew it and you kept doing it anyway. That is way worse. So we decided to err on the side of caution. I went through all of the 3 people's timesheets for 3 years and had to do a spreadsheet to determine how much they should have earned, including overtime, that they were not paid. And we cut them a check and we documented all of it. I can't tell you how many times I run into that. And you as an employer are not let off the hook because you didn't know. You are still held accountable, which seems counterintuitive. How can you do something about something you didn't know about? Department of Labor says you should have known. So the way that we take care of that, and the way I describe it to hourly employees, is, listen, you've agreed to work this schedule from 7 to 3:30. You get a half-hour unpaid break. Here's our commitment to you. We want you to get paid for the work that you do because you're important to us and we value you. And what that means is that when you come to work, you clock in if, there's usually that 7-minute before and 7-minute after window if you have a timekeeping system. When you come to work, if you're supposed to be here at 7, we want you ready and, all set for work at 7 o'clock. Not quarter of, not a half hour before, not 20 minutes before, 10 minutes before, get yourself ready and, 7 o'clock. When, if you were deciding to be helpful and you started coming in 15 minutes early and not letting us know and writing it down in your timesheet, then we would not be doing our job and taking really good care of you and paying you what you deserve to be paid. We do not in any way want to take advantage of your goodwill. And when you work off the clock, you actually are showing in our budget that we have budgeted properly. So you're hiding the work rather that we may have needed to hire a part-time or full-time person, especially if you think how this 15 minutes can accumulate across the spectrum of your employees. So just, I don't think you have to hammer on it, but you do need to make sure that you're paying attention to it and you're having those really important conversations from the perspective of, we don't expect anyone here to work for free. You mean more to us than that. So we need to make sure that our timekeeping records are accurate. We need to make sure that we're budgeting properly. And the best way for us to do that is to partner with you and rely on you to work the schedule you're given. And if if you're thinking something needs to be done 15 minutes before or whatever, then you need to come and talk to us. And by the way, if they work overtime and it wasn't authorized in advance, you have to pay them anyway. You can hold them accountable from a performance perspective, but you still need to pay them those overtime hours or any hours that they were not authorized to work. I am going to touch on safety trainings because in this.
Before you go on, do you want a couple questions related to, one person had a comment that I thought was interesting, that she does a timesheet for herself. I'm thinking she might be family childcare or a director, but she does a timesheet, so she's tracking her time for licensing, so that if there's a licensing visit, she can show her ratios, which I thought was interesting. I also wanted to mention that, and if we have time in a moment, I will do it. If not, you can just follow the link, but sharedservicesvermont.org, which everyone here has access to at no cost to them, has great resources, HR resources, templates, and things that are related to all the things you're talking about. So there's some follow-up information there. Ruth, who asked the question about timesheets for salaried non-exempt employees, had a follow-up question that, Ruth, I'm just going to ask you to unmute and ask it yourself, because I feel like she answered it, so I might not be understanding. So why don't you go ahead and do that?
It's possible. Maybe I missed it in your description, but when you're categorizing employee positions, how do the tests that you mentioned for salaried so exempt versus non-exempt, how does that fit for positions that might be categorized as salaried non-exempt? What is the test for that?
There is no test for salaried non-exempt. Okay. Exempt or non-exempt means you must be paid minimum wage, and anytime over 40 hours in a work week, you must be paid time and a half. Hourly just turns out the way that you are paid, or salary turns out the way you are paid. So there are some instances, I honestly have never run into it, where someone may work the same schedule as an hourly employee every single week, and it doesn't change. You can pay that position on a salaried basis. You still would need to have the same timekeeping records, right? You'd still want to know, when they were working, but you can pay them a set amount. And if you are going to do that, then I would absolutely recommend that you get some guidance on that, so it's set up properly. They would still be eligible for overtime, though, for any hours over the 40 in the work week.
Right. That's what I wanted to make sure. That was my understanding. So I just wanted to make sure about that, because sometimes you do have positions that have responsibility, authority, that sort of thing, that is at a higher level. However, they may be in a salaried type position, but they are still have to have minimum wage and have to have overtime and be. So that's where I was trying to make sure I understood.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And when you look at, and I won't be able to remember all the categories off my head, at the top of my head rather, but when you look at the Fair Labor Standard Act and you're looking at the different categories, so I think there's a category called that there's an administrative, there's a learned professional. There are 5, I believe, different categories under the exempt classification. So they'd have, the position would have to fit under one of those 5,
Right.
and under one of those 5, you're familiar. And under one of whichever of the 5 they fit under, that's where you look at your duties test.
Right. And that's where I'm saying, like, you can have something where a person still would be meeting minimum wage. They still would be eligible for overtime if they work overtime. However, they're not an hourly person, they're salaried because of the type of work that they're doing. That's
I
how
would
understand
say
it.
that differently.
Okay, maybe I said it backwards.
I understand it differently, but we may be on the same page. So if an hourly employee is an hourly employee, if
Right.
they do not pass the salaries and duties test, or do they don't pass one or the other. So they are still going to be a non-exempt employee,
Right.
which we typically will call hourly. They're going to be paid. This is where it gets goofy.
Hourly, but they're a set a number of hours.
Yes. So they still have an hourly rate of pay. You're just setting up in payroll that they get paid a salaried, which would be the set amount.
Right.
And I think that's what you were saying as well. What gets goofy is when we use these terms interchangeably, and then we try to talk about this. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound quite right.
It is very confusing to people especially if they're not used to how you classify positions. So I that's why I was putting it in chat and didn't want to, because I don't want to confuse people, because most people will have one or the other and that's it. But there are some circumstances where you might not have it set that way.
That's right. It doesn't come up very often, to your point, but it does come up. And that would be one of those where, oh, this is different than usual. Let me go and check and make sure I'm getting it set up properly, so that I'm making sure that I am following the Fair Labor Standard Act properly.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. You reminded me too that, with meals and meal breaks, you want to be taking a look at the Fair Labor Standard Act as well as the state of Vermont in terms of what's allowable. If you have an employee and it's an unpaid break and they work during their break, guess what? You need to pay them. So you need to make it clear to your employees that, hey, when you're on break, we don't want you working. Now, in your industry sector, right, you may have someone who's on break and they need to step in and assist because there may be a child that needs assistance and they're there and no one else is there to help, or someone says, hey, Teresa, can you come in and help me? And so I'm going to step out of my break and I'm going to, help. So they just need to be aware that when you are off the clock and you step back into work, you're back on the clock and we want to pay you for that.
How do you properly, what I find that most people will talk to me about is more the other side of it, where you're paying for all the hours an employee is there working, and they don't necessarily have the opportunity to take an unpaid break. So they are taking their break time during their work time and being paid for the whole time. That's what I tend to hear more from programs and providers as what is standard because of meeting ratios.
Yes. I remember eating lunch with the children, and that was my lunch break. So I agree. Sometimes the way that probably works a little bit differently is that, it's those few minutes of time that you're able to step away and take a break, but that's going to be compensable anyway. They're going to be paid. If you do a paid break, just be aware that if you allow your employees to leave the premises when they are on the clock, if they are injured, it is my understanding that is going to be a workers' comp claim for you. So if they get in the car, they run to the store, they get in an accident, that could be considered a workers' comp claim if they're on the clock. So just be thinking about, you may want to put in place that, hey, in an instance where you need to step away and, you know, you've asked, can I leave and go to the store? Just, you may want to have them sign out. So it's on there.
That is the nice thing about using electronic timekeeping, is
Yes.
people can just sign themselves out, go do, come back in, sign themselves back in.
Yes, I agree with that. There's a lot of really, you know, great technologies out there that just make it so easy for folks to be able to do that. I want to make sure that, ooh, we only have 5 minutes left. Oh my goodness. So one of the things that's important for folks to also be aware of is that there are trainings, safety trainings, employee safety trainings that are required through VOSHA. Now, VOSHA is the state approved Occupational and Safety and Health Act, the OSH Act. There are general industry standards that would require us as employers to provide safety training. So safety trainings, you'd need to do some kind of an analysis to determine what trainings would be required, but be thinking about things like walking, working surfaces, slips, trips, and falls, lifting. You would also be required to tell them about injury reporting and incident, you know, if they are injured at work, that if they see an unsafe situation at work, that they have the right under the OSH Act to report their concern directly to OSHA, and that they have the right to tell OSHA, I don't want you to disclose my name to, you know, my employer. So there are those sorts of things. Some you may already be doing because of, again, the nature of the work that you're doing. Bloodborne pathogen training, you're probably already doing that sort of training. That sometimes can fall under the umbrella of OSHA trainings. But if you don't know about that, that's something that would be very important to figure out what they are and have a knowledgeable person provide those trainings. And yes, great question. Are they paid for these required trainings? Yes, they would be paid for those trainings. For sure.
Teresa, I realize we're running out of time, and one question did come up based on what you were talking about previously with the working through lunch breaks. And that is related to the requirement that folks have a break after working a certain amount of time. So
there's no such requirement, as I've never heard of any requirement. Okay. Sorry, I'm multitasking, trying to get that link into the chat there. So the state of Vermont, and please don't quote me on this, even though I'm being recorded. The state of Vermont says rest breaks and bathroom breaks that are reasonable. The Fair Labor Standard Act just says breaks that are 20 minutes or less in duration must be paid. So they don't tell you how often breaks need to be taken. They just provide some guidance around the break itself. Does that make sense? So many employers do indeed say, you know, we are going to have standard breaks, because that's part of your scheduling. And I would imagine that would be pretty important for you when you're looking at childcare ratios. So you're going to want to make sure that you are scheduling these breaks in a way to maintain your ratios, and also to give your employees a little bit, you know, be able to sit down and take a breath for a moment. The other thing that I come up with, or I bump into relative to breaks, are people who are smokers. You need to have a designated smoking area, and it must be at least, I think it's 20 or 25 feet away from the building. It must be away from any windows and doors. And by the way, smokers do not get more breaks than non-smokers because they smoke. They don't. They get what everybody else gets. But they have a need. They have sometimes people have an addiction to cigarettes. Yes, they do. Doesn't change the fact that they get the same number of breaks as everyone else. So, just be aware of that. If you are going to designate a smoking area, which by the way, you need to, because how do you hold people accountable to smoking in the right areas? If you don't say this is where our smoking area is, the other thing that really resonated with me is if you do allow smoking on your premises, you want to have that in a place that is out of sight, not only for the benefit of children, I would imagine you'd be thinking about, but also be thinking about other employees who may have quit smoking successfully or are in the process of quitting, and the smoke or the sight of others smoking causes them to want to smoke again. So some of that is just, hey, we're going to be respectful of everyone at work. And smoking and your smoking policy really needs to include all tobacco products, not just cigarettes. It can be e-cigarettes, it can be chewing tobacco, it is any tobacco product. And that folks, if you do have that smoking area, you want to make sure that they are responsible for keeping it tidy. And if they don't, then maybe that's not something that you're able to offer, or maybe you just have a smoke-free campus.
As always, this was an hour and a half packed full of information. Thank you so much, Teresa. There was a question in the chat about whether you would get this recording tonight. I don't think so. Probably tomorrow. I will send it out. We will also be sending out in YouTube version the entire business series that we've done that culminated in this evening's session. And we will include Teresa's links, so you'll have that information as well. Teresa, thank you so much. This was great. Thank you to all of you who've taken time out of this evening, and the folks at the Small Business Development Center and First Children's Finance. Have a good evening. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
good night.
everyone. Bye.